Hey, y'all. I just want to start off by saying I'm feeling like really emotional right now. It just literally just fell over me. I just want to say, like, first of all, thank you to my family. All of you are my family for coming here. This means so much to me, and I did not expect to be so emotional this early. So I just want to say thank you all so very fucking much, all right? All right, speech, right? I wish to frame the course of this speech by presenting an admittedly personal quagmire that you all may perhaps be able to help me work through. Fair? Fair? All right. Now, before I get to that, I want to state just how honored I was to be asked by David and the rest of the organizing committee to come here and speak about the multiplicity of identity as it relates to structural vulnerability, or rather, more properly understood and politicized as intersectionality, right? Now, please bear with me. I hate giving definitions, but I want to be clear about what I mean when I use particular terms throughout the duration of this speech. Intersectionality was coined by American civil rights activist and leading scholar of critical race theory, Kimberly Crenshaw, a black woman. Can we please get a round of applause for black women? And is defined as the interconnected nature of social categorizations such as race, class, and gender as they apply to a given individual or group, regarded as creating overlapping and interdependent systems of discrimination or disadvantage. Essentially, what the use of intersectionality as a lens proposes is that in order to properly address any issue of systemic oppression, we must first rid ourselves of the desire to engage from a one-dimensional framework, right? For example, say the issue we are trying to confront is the gendered wage gap, right? Now, too often, white feminism would have us to think that women as a whole make 78 cents on every white man's $1. However, what questions that an intersectional lens will ask are, how much money does a black woman make in relation to a white man? Answer, 64 cents. How much money does a Latinx woman make in relation to a white man? Answer, 56 cents. And the questions can go on and on. What about a trans woman? What about a visibly queer cis woman? What about a disabled woman? What about a gender non-conforming employee? The point to be made here is that for some of us, our oppression cannot be traced back to one particular identity. With that said, October is Queer Awareness Month. However, it is also Latino History Month. So I would like us all to take a moment of silence for the black and brown victims of Orlando Pulse nightclub massacre. Thank you. Now, I wish to assure you that me offering this sort of lesson of intersectionality isn't my way of assuming that y'all, the students here in Columbia, aren't up on the latest social justice lingo or praxis, right? However, but rather, what I wish to put into question as I begin to publicly sift through this notion of identity is Columbia, the institution's ability to hold such complexities. And in that, I wish to further bring into question the state's ability as a whole to properly care for our multitudes, in particular that of Black and POC, queer, trans, gender nonconforming people. And herein lies the beginning of my aforementioned quagmire. Last year, Columbia made history by becoming the very first US university to divest from private prisons. I would like us all to take a moment and give a round of applause to the students groups Columbia Prison Divest, whose strategic organizing and tireless efforts spearheaded this necessary movement. Can we have a round of applause? Is anyone from that group here? No? Well, thank you for your work. This divestment follows a rich legacy of resistance exhibited by students of this institution. Most notably, I'm referring to the protests of the late 70s, early 80s that were aimed at convincing the university's trustees to divest all the university's investments in companies that were seen as active or tactic supporters of the apartheid regime in South Africa during the time. Your work has become a blueprint for university students invested in the interrogation of their social political positioning and complicity in slave labor across the country, and I personally commend you. When Columbia sold its estimated 220,000 shares in G4S, the world's largest private security firm, as well as the shares in the Corrections Corporation of America, the largest prison prison company in the United States, it certainly made a statement received by the rest of the country. A statement, as we know, that was prompted by the efforts of students. A statement that helped to position Columbia as one of the more favorable, more progressive Ivy League institutions. However, though this gesture was inspiring and definitely raised awareness of a common practice of universities in this country, its tangible impact was still minimal. Columbia's holdings of G4S stock comprised only 0.015% of G4S market value. Today, that is $4.35 billion. Similarly, CCA has a market value of $4 billion as well. Both firms are still highly profitable and continue to grow. Columbia's divestment had little to no effect on either company's stock price or operations, right? Now, let's go back for a moment and re-examine the last portion of Kimbrell Crenshaw's definition of intersectionality. The overlapping and interdependent systems of discrimination or disadvantage. Now, please humor me. Can you all just say after me? Interdependent. And overlapping. All right, let's remember that. Interdependent and overlapping. Did you know Columbia, established in 1754, is the oldest college in the state of New York and the 5th chartered institution of higher learning in the country, making it one of 9 colonial colleges founded before the Declaration of Independence. Now, if you open up a dictionary, colonialism is defined as the policy or practice of acquiring full or partial political control over another country, occupying it with settlers, and exploiting it economically. However, what we all should know is that that is the politest, read whitest, way of explaining the devastating nature of the colonial project. What we should also know is that when we're talking about colonialism, especially in the US context, we're talking about murder. We're talking about rape. We're talking about suffering, with the brunt of this violence being inflicted upon Native people, Black people, people of color, queer people, women, femmes, and anyone else who falls beneath the category of other. But what I want us to really keep in mind is that when we're talking about colonialism, we're talking about displacement. We're talking about the stealing of resources, the destruction of homes, and the occupying of land, which appears to be, similarly to the history of student resistance here, yet another rich legacy in which Columbia is invested in continuing. Manhattanville is Columbia University's nearly $6 billion expansion plan, which will double the size of the university's campus, right? If you type in manhattanville.columbia.edu into your internet browser, you'll be transported to a beautiful site fully equipped with trees, flowers, and all types of welcoming colors. And by colors, I mean you just might see a colored person. And isn't that wonderful? Isn't that intersectional? The top of the page reads, "A city campus built for people and ideas." Splendid. I like people, and I certainly like ideas. For instance, I like the idea of people who own property in the surrounding community of this university not being pushed out of their place of business due to the creation of new research facilities, dormitories, and fucking Starbucks. I like the idea of people who built their lives here not being displaced or homeless because some redevelopment plan has caused the surrounding areas' rent to rise. Gentrification is defined as the process of renovation and revival of deteriorated urban neighborhoods by means of influx of more affluent residents, which results in increased property values and displacing lower-income families and small businesses. To make it plain, as housing prices rise, the supply of affordable housing drops, and low-income residents are forced from their homes onto the streets and into shelters. Currently, homelessness in New York City has hit a record high with nearly 60,000 people staying in shelters. Now, fuck it, let's be intersectional. According to a quantitative study of the Vera Institute of Justice, more than 10% of those entering prisons and jails are homeless in the months before incarceration, as well as people released from prison to jail on parole who entered homeless shelters in New York City were 7 times more likely to go AWOL during the first month after release than those who had some form of housing. A direct link has been and continues to be found between rates of homelessness and rates of incarceration, which begs the question that I'm sure is on everyone's mind by now. Columbia, my nigga, exactly what prison did you divest from? Where? I'll wait. And herein lies the personal problem I've been hinting at this entire speech. Both homelessness and prison is a reality well known by people who carry similar intersections as me. Being Black, queer, and HIV positive is criminal, is an admission of guilt. Yet here I am, with the audacity to speak at a university that will sooner have me caged. Why? Because Michael Johnson was sentenced to 30 years in prison for allegedly infecting a white boy with HIV. Do you understand that this man is going to spend 30 years of his life in the custody of a state for harboring a disease sanctioned by the state? Do you understand that? On the morning of this past September 15th, I sat in the back of a courthouse accompanied by Makayla Posely and other members of the community and watched a white woman judge sentence bayna-lehkiem el-amin 9 years in prison and 5 years probation for throwing a chair at the heads of Jonathan Snipes and Ethan York Adams while dining at a BBQ's on 23rd Street last year. Jonathan Snipes, the gay white boy who initiated the altercation by striking Bayna in the head while he was seated eating with his friends because he thought he called him a faggot, didn't get any jail time. He wasn't even put on trial, only brought in as a witness. Jonathan Snipes, who after being hit by the chair, was still well enough to deny hospital care and go with his then boyfriend Ethan home. Jonathan Snipes, who after the attack described his attacker, the bald-headed Bayna, as a large Black man with cornrows. Jonathan Snipes, the same man who admitted to already being drunk before continuing to drink at BBQs that night. Jonathan Snipes, as in biblically white, as in so white you cannot hold a candle to him, as in so white you cannot hold him accountable. In her final remarks, the prosecutor made sure to stress that no matter what Bayna's supporters may say, that this case has nothing to do with race, a sentiment that the judge later agreed upon. She then proceeded to say that it was Bayna's act of picking up that chair that took this altercation too far. Everyone has the right to defend themselves, but once he picked up that chair, he was committing a criminal act. And it was in this moment that I fully understood what Kimberell Crenshaw meant when she said an intersectional failure. Here we have two white women, both the prosecutor and the judge, making moral decisions on what can be deemed an appropriate expression of anger for a Black, queer, Muslim man living in the United States who was just struck for no reason by a white boy calling him homophobic. Someone please explain to me, how does one react appropriately? How does one stay within the lines of legality when it is the law that is killing us? The prosecutor stated that by Bayna picking up that chair, it's just proof of him being an angry man, that he is dangerous. And this is the only time I agreed with her. Yes, Bayna is angry, as I am angry, as my mother is angry, as my father is angry, as my brother is angry, as my friends are angry, as my people are angry, as my ancestors are still angry, as my 6-year-old niece will grow up and learn to be angry. And yes, best fucking believe we are dangerous. So I say, of course, a chair. Because what is a wooden chair if not a disguise for the tree they hung us from anyway? But this is not about race. Bayna gets 9 years, and George Zimmerman gets $250,000 for selling the gun he killed a 17-year-old Black boy with. But this is not about race. Bayna gets 9 years, and the only person convicted in the Eric Garner case is Ramsey Orta, the man who filmed the altercation. But this is not about race. Bayna gets 9 years, and the officer that killed Corinne Gaines while she was holding her child gets paid leave. But this is not about race. I thought a lot about the theme the organizers chose for this month while I was writing this. Dissonance, discovering harmony and discord. Admittedly, I had to look up the definition of the word dissonance. An inharmonious or harsh sound. And I thought to myself, some days, the only dissonance I am interested in is the crack of a chair against the head of a racist, gay, white supremacist. But that, too, is not about race, which brings me to my conclusion. In the poem entitled Fixin' Things, Essex Hempfield writes, Why is the world always easier to fix than our own homes? In this speech, I have laid out factual evidence as to why it is we can no longer trust institutions, let alone the state, to keep us safe. However, in my personal life, when I tell people I am not voting in this year's presidential election, or any election for that matter, I am told that I am privileged. I am told that I am part of the problem. I am told that I am no better than the wall Trump wishes to build, and all that may even be true, yet I am always shocked because many of the people who say this to me are the same ones who would never ask me how I am doing, are the same ones who would never lend me $1 if I was in need, are the same ones who wouldn't offer their couch if I was homeless, are the same ones who wouldn't give me half their sandwich if I was hungry, and I wonder, when this election is over, are we still all in this together? What happens the next day? Can I depend on you for bail money when the lesser of two evils decide I am in fact a super predator? The only queer politic I am interested in is the kind you practice in your home. What kind of lover are you? What kind of friend are you? How do you treat your mother? How do you treat yourself? All of these things are what fuel the state and what can dismantle it. Imagine how much refusing to use your friend's due pronouns can empower legislation to pass a bill to ban all trans people from using the bathroom of their choice. Imagine how much a masculine-presenting person refusing to listen to the feelings of their femme partner empowers this patriarchal, militarized country that terrorizes nations abroad. So students of Columbia, I'm returning back to you. If you claim to be outraged about Manhattanville, ask yourself a few questions. How often do you purchase food from the local bodegas? How often do you visit friends in gentrified areas of Brooklyn? How often do you call the cops on local residents? How do we change a culture that influences the laws? How do we create a culture that abolishes the laws? 8 years ago, I voted for a black president and watched as black people continue to die. I will no longer succumb to this fear-mongering. I will no longer play the game from the inside. And if that means I must die for my people, then let me die. Because please believe that if heaven indeed has gates, I will not enter, that I will never be caged again. Thank you so very much. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So I have a little surprise. When I thought about what I wanted to do, or rather share with all you in this space, I was eager to push the interpersonal. I ached for you all to understand how important it is we stop trying to reform or correct a system that isn't even broken. I needed and still need everyone in this room to understand how vital it is for us to begin prioritizing showing up for each other over showing up for the state. In the summer of 2015, I had the honor of getting to know a young woman by the name of Makayla Posely. Makayla began my student, then became my assistant, then became my friend, and is now my family. Makayla and I do not only live together, but we share life with one another. She tells me about her past, her fears, her desires. I tell her about my insecurities, my flaws, my dreams, and together, each and every day, we strive to build a life outside of a cage. So when I was asked to speak here, I knew that the only just thing was to make space for her to be seen in the ways she makes space for me, in the ways the world may never make space for her, in the ways a university may never make space for her. Makayla is not only one of the most, if not the most, brilliant people I have ever met in my life. She also loves people with a ferocity that inspires and heals me every day. She's a playwright with her first one-woman show about her personal connection with Corinne Gaines going up at New York Live Arts in December. She is a proud owner of a record collection and a record player. She's a 70-year-old hip-hop head with dreams of changing the music industry. But most importantly, she is a gift this world does not deserve. When she comes up here to bless you with her words, really, really consider yourself lucky, y'all. It's an unfortunate truth that youth that comes from places Makayla have come from don't make it a space like these or alive. I'll end with this. When I am tired or beat up from oppression and anti-Blackness and racism, and I just want to give up, I think about Makayla, and I say to myself, if anyone deserves a new world, it is her. And for that reason, I continue to fight. Can you please give a round of applause for Makayla Posely? Say this, people.
Hey, y'all. Oh my God. I love him so much. But I'll get started. So first and foremost, I'd like to thank the organizers of Columbia for bringing us together for such a great purpose. Wait, can y'all see me up here? Can you hear me? You're looking at me? Okay, cool. So as I was saying, I'd especially like to thank Timothy for inviting me to offer a speech during this keynote because as a ghost, I'm hardly ever expected to show up anywhere. But since I do have this platform and am visible in this moment, I would like to use it wisely. So by a show of hands, who here knows what it means to hold space for someone, hold someone accountable, be present, or to just practice mindfulness and community care in their everyday lives? Great. I too know what it means to hold space for people and show up for people, but I just want to tell you about myself before I get into why I asked this question. So my name is Makayla, again, Makayla Posely, a 17-year-old femme who, up until about 2 years, has spent most of my life underground with other youth. And by underground, I mean in detention centers, behavioral health schools, psych wards, and all those super healthy places that teens go to have their personhood revoked. Now, I asked everyone if they knew of the previously mentioned terms because, like many of my peers, while underground, I myself learned what it means to hold space, be present, show up when someone needs me, when someone near me needs communal intervention and more. Except we didn't always have names for these things, and it wasn't necessarily a trend or a slew of buzzwords, but something created as a means for survival. Yet, since returning to the quote-unquote real world, I see predominantly white universities and capitalistic nonprofit organizations present these seemingly radical new ways of caring for others without underground youth anywhere in sight. I use the word underground for many different reasons. One being, if you've ever made it as far as the prison portion in the school-to-prison pipeline, or a youth who's just familiar with carceral environments, you begin to build a mystique around you. You're the kid who every so often shows up to school, and when you do, there's a problem. The kid who most people know of but don't get too close to, who hops from place to place so often no one would even have a chance. The one without a verifiable name, who after a few years your peers may ask themselves, damn, whatever happened to what you call it? Or whatever happened to such and such? And just like that, there's not much proof that you ever even happened. Your legacy is just a familiar face that disappears for months on end to a world that no one can locate on a map. It's a social death, thus underground. I'd like to think that anyone removed from this is a member of the quote-unquote real world, for both the fact that we aren't even acknowledged, and also that any world created in chains, such as life underground, is a fallacy. Which leads me to the question of, who does hold white institutions accountable when the invisible gets stolen from, when survival tactics get turned to commodity without recognition of their owner? Just like most oppressed groups, a culture still blooms from underground youth. And it's within this culture where we constantly come up with new ways to live amongst others who experience severe mental disabilities, at-home neglect or abuse, PTSD, sexual assault, homelessness, and sometimes just the baggage that comes along with being a Black teenager. And these heightened cases, it meant that being present for each other and making a space safe was especially critical and could even be a matter of life and death. White supremacy exploits this part of our culture and brings it to queer academic spaces like Columbia as a means for forward thinking. It packages and trademarks this for privileged white millennials in advocacy work and even boardrooms when they've already been given empathy from the whole world, when typically underground youth rarely step foot in these environments. White supremacy can take something as humanly and natural as sitting with another person's feelings and capitalize off of it, turning these practices into yet another institution. The same way it's taken fluid sexuality and given it the inaccessible cage of queer, also a white academic term. The same way it's taken our bodies and given us gender binaries. For us to even begin to identify the intersections of someone's race, class, sexuality, and gender, etc., human versus commodity must be established of the life at hand first. This makes it nearly impossible to open the conversation for someone as ghostly, invisible, and otherworldly as an underground youth. So when speaking about intersectionality and identity in organized spaces like this, I want to push you all to ask yourselves, what allowed me to be present here? What disallowed an underground youth, or any youth for that matter, to not be? Who do I contact to bring them in the room? Depending on how you answer these questions, you can save an underground youth's life by relieving the burden of them having to save themselves. Just the active choice of bringing someone that you learn from to the forefront can usher in a new revolution more nurturing than ever before. Thank you.